Between April 3 and April 4, 1974, the worst tornado outbreak ever impacted the eastern U.S., having 148 tornadoes in one day and also 310 deaths and 7 F5s. Also, a man named Ted Fujita had his big shot to show his new F-scale to the world. Ted Fujita was born in Fukuoka, Japan on October 23, 1920. Skipping up 25 years later in the city of Nagasaki, Japan, as on the morning of August 9, 1945, where Nagasaki would get flattened by an atomic bomb and over 60,000 people were dead. Upon hearing the news, Ted Fujita would travel all the way to Nagasaki to inspect the damage, finding out some impressive information about the location of where the bomb dropped. In 1953, Fujita would move to the U.S., going to the University of Chicago. Upon going to the University of Chicago, Fujita would join the Meteorology group so he could fulfill his lifelong dream of professionally studying tornadoes. He continued to study the damage and impacts of damaging tornado events throughout the 1950s and 60s, like the 1965 Palm Sunday outbreak. In this timeframe, he would also discover that tornadoes had multiple vortices and tornado families. But, in 1971, he would make his biggest contribution to the tornado community as he created the Fujita scale. The scale went from F0 to F5, and it was based on wind speed, as it went a little like this. F0s have wind speeds of less than 73 miles per hour. F1s have wind speeds of 73 to 112 miles an hour. F2s have wind speeds of 113 to 157 miles an hour. F3s have wind speeds of 158 to 206 miles an hour. F4s have wind speeds of 207 to 260 miles an hour, and lastly F5s have wind speeds of 261 miles an hour and higher. Once creating this system, Fujita would need a large tornado event for the scale to gain national recognition, and it looked like he would get his chance on April 3, 1974. A big area of low pressure was located in the Great Plains moving toward the Ohio Valley, and combining that with the surge of moist air, April 3 and 4 would probably produce severe weather, but not to the extent as it was. It started in the morning of April 3 with an F1 and an F2, but this was only the beginning. The first significant tornado would occur near Colfax, Illinois. It would continue on its northeast path through rural areas south of Anchor, Illinois, as the only damage it would do was to small buildings on farmhouses. Once the National Weather Service surveyed the damage, evidence of multiple vortices was seen. This tornado had wind speeds in the F3 range. Another large tornado would form, except in a more popular area north of Blue Mound, Illinois. It would then cross the Sangamon River, going on a path towards northern Decatur. It traveled past Wilkes Corner, causing extensive damage to the area. It would then impact the Macon County Fairgrounds, killing one person and injuring many others. It crossed the interstate, doing severe damage, even pulling a section of concrete out of the road. The tornado would then dissipate minutes later, doing $3.4 million in damages, being rated a high-end F3. Another strong tornado would form a couple miles east of Pesotum, Illinois. Almost immediately when it touched down, it would kill one person in a mobile home. After that, it would hit 5 barns, killing 5 cows in the process. It would then pass Philo and dissipate. The tornado had 1 death and was rated an F3. Another large tornado would start, this time being way down in Tennessee and going through subdivisions of Cleveland. It would narrowly miss the town, having 1 fatality and injuring 100. The first F5 to form began at 3:20 p.m. southwest of Ranger, Indiana, moving towards the town at around 65 miles an hour. It continued on its path, impacting the community of Bandon, Indiana. The tornado narrowly missed the communities of Sulphur Springs and Magnolia before hitting DePauw at F5 strength. All except 10 houses were destroyed in Martinsburg, and also horrific damage was recorded in Daisy Hill. More serious damage was caused in Underwood, New Liberty, and Bartle before dissipating north of Lexington. In total, the Daisy Hill-DePauw F5 had 6 deaths and 86 injuries, as it had a max width of about 1,700 yards, and also at some times the tornado had no condensation funnel, meaning it could have been multi-vortex. Around 10 minutes later, another F3 tornado would go through some small towns in Indiana, having 1 death and 26 injuries. After that, another F3 tornado would go through areas southeast of Indianapolis and had 1 death and 25 injuries. A multiple vortex F4 started south of Charlottesville and went between the towns of Charlottesville and Henry. It then hit Kennard at peak strength. It then dissipated near Sulphur Springs. This tornado luckily didn't hit any big towns and had no fatalities, but unfortunately did injure 17 people. A large F4 began in rural areas near Alert, Indiana. It went over rural areas until it hit the small town of Takeo Center, then hit New Point, Rossburg, Enochsburg and Hamburg before dissipating. The New Point F4 had 4 deaths and 17 injuries on its 35-mile-long path. Another wedge F4 began southwest of Blountville, Indiana. It completely ravaged the town, then went through the western part of farmland Indiana, doing some terrible damage. It kept on its path, narrowly missing Ridgeville, then dissipated near Bluff Point. In total, the farmland F4 had 1 fatality and 17 injuries. After the DePauw Daisy Hill F5 dissipated, the storm created another tornado near Henryville. The tornado tracked northeast, hitting Hanover at F4 strength, then it hit Madison before dissipating. In total, the Hanover-Madison, Indiana F4 had 11 fatalities and destroyed 300 homes and caused $10 million in damages not adjusted for inflation. After that, another F4 began south of Manville, Indiana. It rapidly intensified to an F4, then moved through mostly rural areas before dissipating. The Pleasant, Indiana F4 had 104 injuries and no deaths. 14 tornadoes hit around the same town of Monticello, as these tornadoes are known to be in the Monticello tornado family. One of them hit Filio and had 1 fatality and was rated F3, but the worst was an F4 and destroyed Monticello. It began just after an F3 from the same tornado family. The tornado directly impacted Otterbein, Indiana, then went through rural areas, then hit Monticello, destroying houses and businesses, then reached peak strength and leveled multiple barns. The tornado went through mostly rural areas until it dissipated near Eddy, Indiana. The tornado has a max width of half a mile and killed 18 people and injured 362 people. The second F5 of the day was a giant tornado that destroyed Brandenburg, Kentucky. The tornado would touch down near Hardinsburg, Kentucky. It would go towards the town, inflicting F3 damage to some homes and businesses. The tornado rapidly strengthened to an F4, now going towards Irvington, Kentucky. It swept away multiple homes north of Irvington. The violent tornado would now strengthen all the way to an F5 and was on a collision course with Brandenburg, Kentucky. The tornado swept away well-built anchored-down homes in Brandenburg, which is violent F5 damage. As the tornado moved into downtown, it would destroy almost everything on Green Street, as 18 deaths were recorded on that one road. Extreme windrowing was recorded in this area, which is only seen with the worst tornadoes. Some vehicles would be ripped off their chassis and the chassis would be twisted. The tornado would then impact a graveyard and multiple tombstones would be snapped in half. Before exiting, it would weaken to an F4 and then it abruptly dissipated. The Brandenburg, Kentucky was easily rated an F5, being the second to hit the state, but the Gosser Ridge, Kentucky tornado was downgraded from an F5 to an F4, making the Brandenburg F5 Kentucky's only ever F5 or EF5. Another F5 would hit Sailor Park in Cincinnati, Ohio. Thousands of people witnessed this exact tornado destroy Sailor Park on live television. It would begin near Rising Sun, Indiana. It would rapidly strengthen all the way to a violent F4. It crossed the Ohio River and was officially at F5 strength. Boats were thrown hundreds of feet and heavily damaged. A floating restaurant was picked up and thrown by the tornado. Once it got out of the river area, the tornado swept away many homes, which is textbook F5 damage. Even an entire home was picked up and thrown into the Ohio River. It would weaken to an F4, hitting homes in subdivisions near Cincinnati. Soon after that, it would dissipate. The Sailor Park F5 is known as the most photographed tornado of the entire tornado outbreak and was rated F5 and also had 3 deaths and 219 injuries. Another F4 would go straight through Litchfield, Kentucky and had 3 injuries. Another F4 would hit Elizabethtown, Kentucky and would have 3 deaths and 81 injuries. The same supercell that caused the massive Brandenburg F5 would cause another large tornado to begin near Louisville, Kentucky. It rapidly strengthened going towards the Louisville metro area and destroyed most of Freedom Hall. The rapidly strengthening tornado would hit multiple homes and destroy some as well. It would go straight through the center of the city. Also, in the skies at the moment was a man named Dick Gilbert who would cover the storm from his helicopter. The tornado would soon dissipate. The Louisville F4 would have 3 deaths and 207 injuries. Just after the Sailor Park tornado dissipated, another violent tornado would hit the town of Sycamore and had 2 deaths. Another small tornado would start southwest of Xenia, Ohio, on a collision course with the town, but it was not too much to worry about because right now it was a small tornado that would probably dissipate in about 5 minutes, but that is not what happened. It would strengthen rapidly and become a multi-vortex as many very important scientific videos were taken proving Ted Fujita's multi-vortex theory. The now wedging out F5 tornado would flatten multiple subdivisions of Xenia and swept away numerous homes. Windrowing was also reported. Everything would get destroyed when the tornado hit central Xenia. The Xenia High School was hit as thankfully, students who were practicing for a play took cover before the tornado dropped a school bus on the stage. Trains were then lifted and thrown hundreds of feet from the railroad tracks. The A&W Root beer stand was hit and multiple people died. It would leave Xenia and weaken before dissipating. 36 people died and 1,150 people were injured, as also there were $100 million in damages from the tornado not adjusted for inflation. After a 10-month survey of the outbreak, Fujita gave the Xenia tornado an F6 rating, but it was downgraded to an F5 because an F6 was considered as inconceivable damage. Another large F4 would hit Frankfort, Kentucky and had 122 injuries and 4 deaths. Another F3 would have 3 deaths in Gold City, Kentucky. A very isolated supercell would hit Tucker's Crossing in Glaston, Mississippi that would have 1 injury. Roachville, Kentucky was hit by a violent F4 that had 56 injuries. Moreland, Kentucky was hit by an F3 that had 1 death and 98 injuries. Another violent F4 would have 7 deaths and 28 injuries, and a little bit north, Cynthiana, Kentucky was hit by an F3. Hajira and Highway, Kentucky was also hit by an F4 that had 10 deaths. An isolated supercell would start in central Alabama while huge tornadoes were occurring in the northern part of the state. This supercell would drop a tornado near Carrollton, Alabama. It would intensify greatly as it entered Tuscaloosa County, Alabama. A church was destroyed, killing 2 people. The tornado entered downtown Jasper, doing severe damage to businesses. A new fire station was also destroyed. It crossed the Lewis Lake in the south side of Cullman, Alabama. Homes were damaged, resulting in the last death of the tornado, but it dissipated moments later. The Jasper-Cullman F4 had 3 deaths and 178 injuries. One of the worst tornadoes in Georgia history would hit Resaca, Georgia and had 9 deaths. Another F3 would hit multiple subdivisions of Murfreesboro, Tennessee and had no deaths or injuries. Livingston, Kentucky was hit by a large F3 tornado that had 7 deaths. A large supercell would produce a tornado near Moulton, Alabama. It went over Mount Moriah, Alabama and rapidly intensified to a large violent tornado and swept away many homes and sent vehicles flying hundreds of feet, and there were 6 deaths in this area. The destruction in this area was some of the worst ever. It would keep its ridiculous strength in rural areas, destroying entire forests. Also, extreme ground scouring was reported. Even soil was dug up from the ground and plastered onto trees. Maintaining its strength, the tornado would destroy Tanner, Alabama as homes were swept away and other larger buildings were destroyed. The tornado exited Tanner and entered the communities of Harvest and Capshaw, continuing to obliterate entire homes, and a bathtub was even found from a home that was found deeply embedded in mud. The tornado would dissipate moments later. The first Tanner, Alabama F5 would have 28 deaths, making it the third deadliest of the outbreak. While rescue efforts were underway, another tornado was developing and would be hitting the same exact area. The second tornado would begin just half a mile away from where the first tornado started along the Tennessee River. The first community that was hit was Tanner, Alabama again, as the occasional building left standing was instantly vaporized. Someone who was injured by the first tornado was taken to the church that collapsed from the second one, killing him. After destroying Tanner again, the tornado would go through what is left of Capshaw and Harvest. Many homes were swept away, and also windrowing was recorded just like the first tornado. It swept away even more homes in Hazel Green, Alabama. It crossed the Tennessee-Alabama border and destroyed many more homes, having 6 more deaths. The tornado would dissipate soon after, having its death toll be 16 and 45 total from the 2 tornadoes. Another tornado would basically continue the path of the Tanner tornadoes and go through Tennessee, having 11 deaths and being rated F4. Another large tornado would hit Rutledge Hill and have 0 deaths and 1 injury. Another F3 would hit Ferguson, Alabama, having 9 injuries. Another F4 would go through rural areas in Georgia, having 6 deaths. Poplar Grove was hit by a violent F4 tornado that had 10 deaths and 51 injuries. That same supercell would also produce another F4 tornado that had 7 deaths. Sulphur Springs was hit by an F4 that had 5 deaths. After that, a tornado would begin near Caledonia, Alabama, and was very fast-moving and nocturnal. It would hit the Monterey Trailer Park early in its path. It would become very violent and hit Gwynn at F5 strength. It would hit the Gwynn mobile home plant and destroy everything. It would do insane damage as a massive wedge tornado, obliterating structures. The downtown area was also very damaged, some buildings even being destroyed. Tree debarking and intense ground scouring both occurred in this area. The large tornado exited Gwynn and started moving towards Twin. Once it got to the community, it would destroy mobile homes and do damage to regular homes. It would move into Delmar, Alabama, and destroy numerous homes, and some mobile homes were obliterated. Some mobile home frames were even wrapped around trees. The tornado would exit Delmar and move into the William B. Bankhead National Forest and flatten thousands of trees with a path of about a mile wide. Minutes later, the tornado would finally dissipate. The Gwynn, Alabama F5 is now known as one of the most violent tornadoes ever and also had 28 deaths. It also would have the longest path of any of the F5s in the outbreak. That will do it for this video. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe and watch one of the videos on the screen.